Yes, hi, Margaret.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's okay. I hope you feel well after the surgery.
Yani, thank you. I'm better.
Yeah, thank you. We will start after 5 minutes. We give an opportunity for the others to join.
Okay, perfect. I need 2 minutes as well. I'll be back.
Yeah, it's okay. Yes, shall we start now, Dr. Margaret?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Yes, hello everyone. On behalf of Dr. Taha Ibrahim Shabib, the Dean of the College of Education for Humanities, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Margaret from the University of Boston. Actually, it is a great honor for us here at the University of Anbar to have such a great figure with us in this Zoom call. some biography, some short biography about Margaret. Margaret Litvin is Associate Professor and Chair in the Department of World Language and Literature at Boston University. Her book, Hamlet's Arab Journey, Shakespeare's Prince Ad Nasser's Ghost, 2011, was translated into Arabic in Egypt in 2017. Her current research focuses on Arab, Russian, and Arab Soviet literary ties. She has also published a translation of Jawad al-Asadi, Mamdouh Adwan, and Sun'Allah Ibrahim. If you have any question you would like to ask Dr. Margaret, she will be very happy to answer them at the end of her talk. And also you can write your question on chat box if you have any. Now the word is for you, Dr. Margaret, and we are eager to listen to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Majeed, for this nice invitation. I've always wanted to guest lecture in Iraq, and I've been invited several times, but it was too complicated. But now, thanks to Zoom, everything is possible. I can even speak to you from my room in Boston with my broken ankle, sitting up on a pillow. So I hope that what I say today will make sense. But please, I want you to participate and ask questions in the chat. And afterwards, I'll leave a lot of time for questions. So the first thing I want to know from the students here, not the professors, but the students, if you could type in the chat in Arabic or in English, 1 or 2 words, what do you think about Hamlet? What is your general impression or your first association with Hamlet? When I say Hamlet, what do you imagine? Is it a gesture? Is it a word? What is it?
Yes, just a minute. Please, this is a question to my student. What do you feel when we mentions Hamlet? Safa, please, Safa and the other students. You can write on chat box.
So this is the question. كيف تتصور شخصية Hamlet?
I don't know if you...
I don't know if people's chat is working. If your chat is not working, something else you could do is unmute your video and make a gesture. Is there an expression or a gesture you associate with Hamlet? I'll tell you in a minute why I'm asking.
Yes.
Someone says revenge is the main thing they associate. Pirates.
Pirates, yes.
It's kind of random. Why pirates? If I say Hamlet, if I say about a man, oh, he's such a Hamlet. He's so much like Hamlet. How is he? What do you think he's like? What do you associate?
I'm sorry, could you ask again, please?
The question is, what do you associate with Hamlet? How do you picture the character? So كيف نتصور الشخصية?
شلون تصورون شخصية هاملت؟ أوصفوا هاملت.
Obviously, I feel he's suffering from his life because he lost his beloved, he lost his kingdom, his crown maybe, and I think this suffering will develop to revenge.
Okay.
You know, any people who suffer from his life, he will feel that all the people hate him. He don't have anything in his life. That's why he will revenge. He hates his uncle, and he will kill him in the end. That's why, if we're looking for an objective reason or a subjective reason to feel why he killed his uncle in the end, he do that because he wants revenge. That's mean this man is suffering. That's all.
So okay, we have some different.
Thank
you. We have some different explanations. So he embodies suffering. You also mentioned Ahmed Majeed, you also mentioned dispossession, that he has been robbed of something. He's been robbed of his,
I'm sorry, because
his kingdom and his
electricity.
political rights. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you ask again, please?
No, I'm just repeating what you said. Also in the chat, I see people saying dignity, intelligence, sensitivity, but also somebody texted me in the private chat, somebody who postpones everything, somebody who is a delay. I'm talking about Hamlet specifically because Hamlet is a character about whom everybody in the world has an opinion. He is not, I think, a character from Western literature. He is a character from world literature. When you talk to an Egyptian about Hamlet, I did my research in Egypt. There's no sense that Hamlet is foreign, that this is a Western import or something. No, everything is very close. Every taxi driver in Cairo can tell you his favorite version of Hamlet and why he thinks Hamlet did this or that. This is not a character who is perceived as a Western import. And so, because many, many people take Hamlet very personally, I can already see in your comments in the chat how personally many of you take Hamlet. Because of this, he becomes a good cross-cultural index for learning things about a society, learning things about a culture. I'll tell you what, when I have a live audience in person and I ask everybody to make a gesture that reminds them of Hamlet, most American and European audiences will do this. I am holding a skull, but I am not saying, alas, poor Yorick, which is what Hamlet actually says when he holds the skull. I am saying to be or not to be. I am thinking too much. This is the stereotype of Hamlet. This guy here, the sensitive guy in the middle. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is Sir Laurence Olivier in his film of Hamlet. In the beginning of the film, he says, "This is the story of a man who could not make up his mind." Yeah, I don't think that's what Hamlet is a story of, but that's what Laurence Olivier thought. And he had good historical reasons to think that. And it was very influential. You can see the beginning of this cartoon down here in the lower left corner. This is a cartoon version of this. Nakun, oh, akun, oh la akun, Hamlet. So it turns out this is not always true. This is not cross-culturally true. Hamlet is not for everybody. A hesitator or a deep thinker or a man who could not make up his mind. And in Arabic, I found that nakun or la nakun means something completely different. It's about an existential battle between justice and oppression, between being left behind by history and participating in one's history. This week, we are experiencing the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring uprising in Egypt. And you saw things like this, في ميدان تحرير.
Yes.
This is an appropriation of Hamlet. You can't say it's wrong. You can't say they misunderstood Shakespeare. This is from Beirut. I took this photo in 2005 around the demonstrations about ending the Syrian occupation in Lebanon after the assassination of Rafiq Hariri. Again, to be or not to be, now is the time. This is Yani, it's this, it's not this. It's urgent, it's political. So I want to say that studying Arab Shakespeare is useful for everybody. It is useful for you living in an Arab society, and it is useful for British and American people who think they know Shakespeare or think they own Shakespeare to understand that actually nobody has direct contact with Shakespeare. Everybody's contact with a famous text is indirect. It comes to you through a tradition. You can't just access the original meaning, just as with any religious text. You cannot access the original meaning by yourself. It comes to you through a historical tradition of interpretation. However, I will show you how this tradition can hide. The sources, the hidden sources, can be very easy to overlook, so that each culture can think that its Shakespeare is the real Shakespeare. And finally, I will show you from the Arab context something that is true everywhere in world literature, which is just because you are reading or adapting a British text does not mean you are getting your interpretation from Britain. In fact, your interpretation may be more influenced by where you studied, by France, by the Soviet Union, by the United States, by other inputs, other high prestige literary cultures. So I'll show you some examples. This is more political Hamlet. Nakun, Ola Nakun. You notice it's collective. This is Handala, the Palestinian caricature hero. This is Nakun, Ola Nakun in the plural. I just wanted to point this out. You know this, but my American audiences do not know this. Arabic has no infinitive. Whoever's phone is dinging, if you could mute it, that would be wonderful. I hear a little ding. So in Arabic, you can't say to be. You have to choose akun or nakun. You have to choose who is being. Who is being or not being. And for political purposes, it is most often the collective. It is the group, nakun. This affects how the character is read, even in the theater. This is Anwar Sadat, again, in 1972, before the 73 war. He's saying the challenge for us is to be or not to be. And for the entire, al-Watan al-Arabi to continue to exist or to disappear. This rhetoric is available. It's a little bit different in the theater, but I'll show you how the theater connects to the politics. Usually, here I'll go to Arabic. Usually when we're teaching in Arabic, when we're teaching about appropriation, al-iqtibas, I'm calling it, adaptation of Shakespeare, usually we teach like this. You have a Shakespeare text and you have an adaptation that responds to this Shakespeare text and responds to its local context. Everyone understands?
Yeah, it's clear.
Clear? It's clear. Yeah. So it's too clear. This is the problem. We're human beings. We have two eyes. We like to compare, text 1 with text 2. It's very simple. It's too simple. Unfortunately, there's more stuff going on. Multiple contexts. This is what I called in my book, the Global Kaleidoscope. So yes, there is a Shakespeare play. Now, let's say I am adapting this play. I am an Arab writer. Maybe I never read the Shakespeare play. Maybe I only read it in translations. Maybe I am, yes, there is a political context. There's a cultural context. There are local fashions, previous local adaptations. local adaptations that this one responds to, and all kinds of global adaptations from different traditions. So this is more complicated than this, right? You have to have more variables in your mind, but it's worth it. One reason it's easy to forget about this is that writers themselves will try to hide it. Can anybody read what's on the board behind Yusuf Shaheen's character here? This is the character Yahya from Iskandariya Leh.
Yes.
Can you read it?
Yes, Ahmed.
Yes.
Fadal.
To be or not to be, that's the question, I think.
Right.
If we can, whether
No, yes, to be or mouth to be.
It's behind his head, so you can't
to
see
be
it. But
or mote to be.
or note to be. You understand what they're doing? So this is
Yeah.
from Iskandariya Leh. They're in the British school.
It's old movie.
Yeah, 70s,
Yes.
1978. So this is the story. This is the Arab artist's story about how he makes Shakespeare his own. This story is not completely true, but it's very beautiful. It's very seductive. It's a post-colonial story about domination and resistance. So the British schoolmasters in Victoria College, this British school in Iskandariya, are forcing the students to memorize Shakespeare. The students are cheating. You can see on the board behind them, they have written the text that they are supposed to memorize in Arabic. Their teacher does not know Arabic. He can't read Fusha. So he does not know that they are cheating. They are supposed to recite it from memory, to be or not to be, that is the question. And instead they're looking at the chalkboard, to be or not to be, that is, but this character, the artist, Yahya, is different. You see, the subtitle is from a different scene. It is from Mashhad al-Um, when the closet scene, when Hamlet holds two pictures for his mother and says, look here upon this picture and on this. So he's not doing the assignment. He's reciting in Arabic, not in English. So he brings the mother scene and the mother tongue into this stupid assignment and makes it his own. The reason you need a subtitle for this scene in English is because he is reciting in Arabic, in his own language. So this is the story that an Arab artist will tell you. It's a post-colonial story. Edward Said tells you the same story. The story is the West shoved Shakespeare at us and we took it back and made it our own. Okay, that's a good story. But in fact, things get complicated quickly if you start doing the research. This is the oldest surviving Arabic Hamlet translation. This is the ending. It is a happy ending. Hamlet survives. It is not a tragedy. Hamlet does not die. He survives and he becomes the king. And the ghost comes back, Shabah, to bless him at the end, while the other characters are singing off stage. This is ridiculous, right? This is a terrible ending for Hamlet. So for 100 years, critics, Arab critics, made fun of Tanyus Abdu, the translator of this version. They said, he's backward, he's uncultured, he is writing for backward audiences that don't know what good art is, etc. Actually, here's what happened. Tanyus Abdu did not know English. He was translating, as I discovered. It was not hard to discover this. It's just that nobody had ever looked before. He was translating from Alexandre Dumas, this guy, from French. But he didn't advertise that fact. I don't know if you can see the small writing here, تأليف شكسبير الشاعر الإنجليزي الشهير. He didn't say تأليف Alexandre Dumas, you know, author of the Three Musketeers. He didn't say that because that wouldn't have been as cool. But that is actually what he did. And so it turns out that this Tanyas Abdul took his happy ending not from his, you know, backward, uncivilized Arab audience and its demands, but from the French, from their hyper-civilized, neoclassical ideas about theater, where a play had to end with justice and you couldn't just kill a character like Hamlet. He had to triumph because he was the good guy. You know. So it's not the Arabs' fault at all. It was a French play. But this is what I call a vanishing intertext, where a writer will hide his sources because they are less prestigious. And so it's hard to trace exactly what path a play or a text follows. This is Khalil Mutran. And he was a classicizer. He was an opponent of Ammea in the theater. And he wanted to clean up Hamlet as well as Othello and the other plays that he translated. But still his sources were French. So the earliest Shakespeare translations into Arabic were not done through English. They were done through French, with all of the baggage of that. This is another kind of source. You know this character. This is Ibrahim Jabra, very famous Palestinian intellectual who lived in Iraq. He lived in Baghdad. He was an artist and a poet and an art critic and a very, very gifted and prolific translator. Look at his view of Hamlet. Hamlet for him, كأنما راح فداء لنا وكأنه قد أحبنا كما أحب أوفيليا وكما أحب صديقه Horatio. This is a Hamlet who is like Jesus Christ, who is a sacrificial figure, kind of a modernist Arab intellectual Hamlet Christ figure. This was also very influential in Iraqi Shakespeare in particular. So what I want you to understand is that when I say, what do you think of Hamlet? Your answer does not come simply from Shakespeare. It comes from other people, other adaptations or interpretations or translations or criticism about Shakespeare. So let's look how this plays out in theatrical adaptation. My book, Hamlet's Arab Journey, traces basically three phases. The first phase is nationalist pride, post-colonial pride. Arab countries are setting up, each one its own Masrah al-Watani, and each one its own higher institute of drama in its capital, and they're trying to prove that they can do serious theater, that they can master world theater. And Shakespeare is part of that. Then after, basically after the Naksa, after the 1967 defeat, and especially after the death of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Hamlet takes on a different shape and is used to ask different questions about political theater and justice. And very soon, by the mid-1970s, those questions are answered ironically. They're answered bitterly. Arab writers start to say, no, Hamlet is a failed hero. He's an intellectual who made a mistake. He thought that political theater could accomplish political change, and he was wrong. And here the Hamlet gesture, the prototypical Hamlet gesture, instead of being, this, it becomes this. He's holding a bottle and he's drinking too much because he is disappointed and doesn't know how to act as an artist to counteract a repressive dictatorial regime. So here you go, more proof that Shakespeare gets used in different ways and is completely naturalized into, at least in Egypt, not as a foreign anything. Here he is already in 1912. Egypt is still struggling against British colonialism, but Shakespeare is a friend. He's a sha'ir, a riwa'i al-Inglisi, a demokrati. Here he is. Abdel Nasser himself performed. He played the part of Julius Caesar in a Shakespeare production at his school. And a lot of Nasser's rhetoric, his own speeches, his famous speeches later, actually draw on this background, playing Caesar in the 30s. And theater was always very important to Nasser as a demonstration of Arab unity in two ways. First of all, what they're doing is Tajir al-Bunduqiyya, the merchant of Venice, and also they're doing it in Damascus, just before Egypt and Syria have their divorce in 1961, just before the United Arab Republic falls apart. So this is a proof of Arab unity, first of all, against the Zionist enemy. That's the symbolic value of Merchant of Venice, but also Egypt and Syria together. And Nasser's in the middle. He's very comfortable, like an actor, with the microphone, with the center of the stage. Russia is also important here. The Soviet Union is an important partner. And so Soviet culture starts flooding in. So in 1964, there's a film of Hamlet produced in the Soviet Union. And these are 700 Egyptian intellectuals who come to discuss it in Nadwat al-Masrah. If you can imagine 700 people coming to a discussion about a Soviet film. Because it's hot, it's exciting. It's a discussion about Hamlet, but also about the possibility of political action and justice. And so it becomes a debate between different leftist groups. And so by the mid-60s, there's a choice between this guy, the guy who thinks too much, Laurence Olivier, the British Hamlet, the German Hamlet, the Western Hamlet, and over here, the Soviet guy, the fighter for justice, who is going to lose, but he's going to die fighting. He's not going to hesitate. And this is poor Karam Mutawa, who had to choose which Hamlet to be in 1964 and come up with a third way in this Cold War situation. And so there are different plays that do this. I want to show you Mohammed Subhi. So he watched the Soviet film. He watched it, he told me he saw it 17 times. And his Hamlet, produced after Nasser's death, is active. He's a revolutionary fighter. He's furious and pure. He seeks justice and freedom, hurriya wal adala, right? It never changes. And he is influenced by this Soviet film that he watched. You can see the whole video of this production. I got Mohammed Subhi to give us the video cassette, and we put it online at Global Shakespeare's site at MIT. You can watch the whole film. He does some things to make Hamlet more active. For instance, he takes the Nakun or La Nakun speech and puts it at the end in Act 5. not as a hesitation, but as a declaration of purpose. So he makes some changes to the text to pursue this Soviet-inspired vision of an active dissident Hamlet. But this quickly got old. And so I studied in my book, and I also translated a few of these. One of them is Iraqi, Insu Hamlet by Jawad al-Asadi, who lives in Beirut. It's also called Shebek Ophelia. And it's typical of these plays. Another one that I translated is called Hamlet Yastayqiz Muta'akhiran, right? He wakes up late. He's asleep the whole play. He's like, oh, what's happening? Oh, my mother, she married. Oh, my father, he died. And people are like, look, there's a dictatorship. Do something. And he doesn't do anything. So in these plays, this Hamlet is a disappointment. He's a loser. He hesitates not for the reason that the Western Hamlet hesitates, not because he thinks too much, but because he has tried political action and failed. This play is still current somehow. I can show you, I think I can, let me see. I think I can actually show you the end of a production of Ophelia's Window, just a few minutes. This
That's okay.
This play is called Ophelia's Window. It's written by Jawad al-Asadi in the 90s. So probably it was somehow about the figure of Saddam Hussein being Claudius, being the murderous dictator Claudius in this play. But this play was actually staged in Baghdad last month, amazingly, among the corona and all the disruption and everything, in the National Theater in Baghdad by Munad al-Dawood, who is an Iraqi director and actor who studied in St. Petersburg in Russia. And just a couple of seconds so you get an idea of, can you see my screen?
Yeah, clear.
So just a little bit, this is the death of Hamlet at the end.
Yeah.
عليك أن تحزم حقيبتك وترحل فورا. لست مطمئنا إلى هذه الأمور. إن كلاوديوس يثير الفزع والخوف بين الناس.
لن أزحزح جسدي عن هذا المكان قبل أن أنهي ما أنا بصدده.
وهل ما أنت بصدده أغلى من حياتك؟
أنا في حالة انعدام كلي للروح. لا وزن للعالم. العالم يبدو خفيفا. أستطيع أن أضعه على راحة يدي ثم أسقطه في الغيب.
حمد، ألا حقك تبدو الشوارع فارغة وموحلة كأن الناس ابتلعوا أنفسهم وناموا. لن ترى سوى الجنود، إنما بلاد الجنود. حمد، علينا أن نهرب. الوقت الآن واتيا. أنجو برأسك عن صديقي. اهرب 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 اهرب. حمد انجو برأسك. اهرب يا صديقي. اهرب.
So you see, it's like that. This is a Hamlet who is radically passive. You can see why the play is called Forget Hamlet. And so what I'm telling you is, if you don't understand the history, if you don't know that the Arab Hamlet used to be a hero, you will miss the drama. You will not understand why it is so sad that this Hamlet is so radically passive. He is so helpless. that actually Ophelia has to tell him at one point. Ophelia tells him, let me find it. Oh, I don't have it here, sorry. Ophelia tells him, this is from another place. She tells him, get yourself to a monastery. So she flips his speech on him. Unless you understand where this comes from, that this is a reversal of an Arab hero Hamlet tradition, you'll miss why it is so dramatic and so pathetic. This is another one. This is another one that I translated by Mamdouh Khadouan. He's a theater guy. He's a theater director. He wants to make a political play called Shahrayar from Alf Layla wa Layla. And he wants to do isqat siyasi. He wants to catch the conscience of the king through his play. He wants to turn the play into a knife to stab the king. And Horatio says, look, art doesn't work that way. Art is not a knife. A play cannot stab somebody. And in fact, the play shows that Horatio is right. Fortinbras comes. Fortinbras represents Israel in this play. He comes and he says, oh, my capitalists, they need Hamlet out of the way. Or they'll hesitate to invest their millions in our joint venture. Yeah, Claudius. And please get Hamlet killed. Get him, and remove him. Hal kalami wadih. And it's perfectly clear, and Hamlet is killed shortly thereafter. So this is a phase of Arab Hamlet adaptation that is ironic, it's funny, it's smart, it's bitter. And to understand it, you have to understand the Soviet tradition that came before and the investment of all of these hopes in Hamlet as a fighter for justice. Here's another one from Jordan, فرقة مسرحية وجدت مسرحا فمسرحة Hamlet by Nader Omran. Same thing, the king has no conscience. You can't catch his conscience because he denies that the story looks like him. He says the isqat is nothing in particular. Oh yeah, sure, yeah, it reminds me of Denmark, wonderful. Khalas. If you want to, in the question and answer, I can talk more about Suleiman al-Bassam, who is a Kuwaiti and global playwright director who has a very political, Western-oriented, I think, Arab adaptation of Shakespeare. But basically what I'm saying is that by looking at Arab Shakespeare, we can learn about Shakespeare reception and adaptation as such. We can learn that there are many, many input channels from English, from Russian, from Eastern Europe through Bertolt Brecht and Jan Kott, from the United States, from Britain again in Laurence Olivier and in Peter Brook and other influential cultural producers. It's not always an Arab adaptation of a British text. And these lessons can be applied to all kinds of adaptations, even outside the Arab world, including an English to English adaptation. For instance, a Black American playwright who rewrites Othello. These same techniques of looking for the global kaleidoscope are useful for analyzing how that text gets its meaning. So this is basically what I wanted to tell you today. I'm happy to send you a copy of my book in English if you want. You can also find it in Arabic, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Margaret, for this enjoyable and stimulating lecture. Now it is time for questions. I start with my own question. You talked about adaptation. So the play is adapted by by so many writers, Arabic writers, Arabs, writers from Arab. So do you think that the adaptation, by using the adaptation, the original text will lose its soul, will lose its essence when the writer or when someone adapt the play like Hamlet, for example?
Yes and no. I think it will lose some of its possibilities, and other possibilities will be sharpened. And sometimes this is useful. Inevitably, when we read something, we read, like for instance, if we read a text now that has a plague in it, an epidemic, a waba, that will stand out to us, right? It will be sharper. It will be more vivid, even if it's not the main subject that the book was about. For us, we will see something in it that resonates with our situation. And so ultimately it closes, an adaptation closes off some insights, but it definitely pursues and sharpens others. And for Western audiences, they are accustomed to a depoliticized Hamlet, a Hamlet without politics, a Hamlet who's all about, he's an individual and his subjectivity and his consciousness, and everything that is interesting happens between his ears in the play. And so for Western audiences to see something like the Indian film Haidar about Kashmir, or to see something like Suleiman al-Bassam's Mu'tamar al-Hamlet, it's shocking because it reveals possibilities in the Shakespeare text that they didn't see. But once they see them, they are clearly there. The political, the dispossession, the fact that he's been robbed of his throne, the fact that he says Claudius stole his election. This is very current right now. Many parts of the world are fighting to preserve the results of fair elections. And so sometimes an adaptation can help you see something that is there in the original, but that you might have missed, and that actually enriches your reading.
Yes, great.
Majeed had a question in the chat, which is not my field. I don't know how Shakespeare,
yes,
how much reality Shakespeare used. I think if you are interested in this, there are people to read. I can recommend two in English, and they are James Shapiro, who has all kinds of books about Shakespeare's life circumstances and how they entered into the plays, and Stephen Greenblatt. I will share one thought that I learned from Greenblatt, which is how Shakespeare makes a play interesting, a tragedy. He takes the motive, the reason for action of the main character, and he scrapes it out. When you're cleaning a melon and you throw away the seeds, this is what he does. He throws away the main motivation and creates a kind of emptiness in the middle of the play. For instance, in Shakespeare's source, where Shakespeare got the story for Hamlet, Hamlet pretends to be insane, Majnun. Why? Because it keeps him safe. It preserves him from the king detecting his plot. But Shakespeare removes this. Hamlet's madness does not keep him safe. So why does he still pretend to be mad? Or why does he become mad? And this creates this deep mystery in the center of the play that makes Shakespeare's plays so rich to come back to over and over, and also so frustrating because you can never pin them down. Mustafa Ali, sorry for interrupting you. I'm really wondering if the comparison is possible between Arab writers, critics, analysts, adaptations of Hamlet's character or not. Can you explain?
Yes, Mustafa, can you explain, Mustafa?
Are you there?
And he want to ask, is there any possibility to make adaptation between Arab writers and Hamlet's character?
When he comes back, I'll ask him to explain what he means. Because yeah, I think a comparison is possible. I think you can find patterns. But yeah, we should talk more about this. I have a couple of questions about Queen Gertrude. Is she guilty? And does she reflect Shakespeare's view of women in general? What is her importance in the play? I want to say something about Shakespeare's text. The text we are reading is an assemblage of two different plays called Hamlet. They were edited together by an editor. One of them is called the Bad Quarto, the first quarto. A quarto is a small book. It's cheap. There was another quarto, the second quarto. And these two plays are both by Shakespeare, it seems. And they're both called Hamlet. But they have very, very different queens. Queen Gertrude in the first quarto actually defends Hamlet. She tries to save him. She and Horatio start a conspiracy, a counter conspiracy to save Hamlet. So I think that shows you how much ambiguity there is in the character of Gertrude. You can read her as protecting herself, like what's she supposed to do? What would happen to her if she didn't marry Claudius? She's just taking care of herself. You could read her as protecting her son. What would happen to her son if she didn't marry Claudius? He'd be killed for sure immediately. Hamlet doesn't realize that or care, but it's true. You could read her as carried away by love or sexual desire for Claudius. You could read her as a cynical political actor. I think it's amazing that there is so much space in that character to read it so many ways. Not just because she is a woman, but because she is in this claustrophobic palace environment where her choices are so limited. Noor, you have a hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, Noor.
Yes, good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for this gorgeous lecture. About the statement to be or not to be, some critics refer to the to be or not to be that portrays Hamlet as a very confused man. He's a very unsure of himself, and his thoughts often waver between two extremes due to his relatively strange personality. In the monologue, he contemplates whether or not he should continue or end his own life. He also considers seeking revenge for his father's death. In my opinion, he was a coward. He preferred to die rather than to cause more crimes or to kill his uncle and be a murderer just like him. On the other hand, he may think that if he kills his uncle, he will send him to heaven instead of hell. So maybe these reasons that leads him to his hesitation. And this causes him an inner conflict inside him, maybe drove him to be crazy. Can you comment something about that?
Sure.
Yes,
I mean,
thank you.
yeah, no, this is a good, solid interpretation. I think in order to assume that Hamlet hesitates, you have to accept that he could have acted sooner. And we know only one scene where this is true It's the prayer scene that Noor mentioned where he hesitates. He says, oh, now I could, you know, do it, Pat. I could stab him while he's praying. Oh, but maybe I don't want to send him to heaven. This is the only scene where Hamlet really has an opportunity to act. At other times, he is very limited. He's watched all the time. The play is full of spies. It starts, somebody asked why it starts with the police. This is why, because it's a security state. Everyone is watching everyone. There's a scene where Claudius and Polonius are hiding, watching Hamlet have a date with Ophelia. Then the next scene, Hamlet is watching Claudius watch the play. Everyone is spying on everyone. Everyone is surveilling and reporting. So this prayer scene where Claudius prays is the only chance that Hamlet actually has to carry out his plan. So two things about that. First of all, it is after. It's after all his monologues about how he hesitates and whatever. So the only reason you think Hamlet hesitates is because he tells you so himself.
Yes, right.
In his monologues, if you forget about, you know, he's constant, oh, what a rogue and peasant slave. Oh, I would have blooded all the regent's kites, blah, blah, blah. But actually, he has no opportunity until then. He has not hesitated. He killed Polonius. He's going to kill Polonius behind the curtain from not enough hesitation. He jumps out. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that the prayer scene in the Arab adaptations that I mentioned, the ones after 1975, it is cut. It is universally removed because the Arab adapter cannot imagine that Claudius is trying to pray, trying to ask for forgiveness. It doesn't make any sense to the Arab adapter. And also because it removes the only evidence of Hamlet as a hesitator. If you take that scene out, then you have a very clean story about a man who has no opportunity. And the only exception to that is Suleiman al-Bassam, who made his play essentially for a Western audience, although it was in Arabic. And his Claudius does pray, but he prays to the United States. He prays to the god of petrodollars. That's a disgusting scene. So it's also not exactly a conscience. We have so many good questions in the chat. I don't know where to go. I wanted to say one more thing about the suicide. So in Act 3, Scene 1, to be or not to be, Noor suggested that Hamlet is contemplating suicide. This is a very typical reading. However, first of all, he is not contemplating suicide. He has already made a plan. At the end of Act 2, he has already said, the play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. He's already ordered the players. It makes no sense for him to kill himself there. And secondly, I want to suggest to you that when he says this, to be or not, this speech makes no sense. It's a good speech. I can't say, to be or not to be. The most famous speech in all of English literature. I can't say it's not a good speech. That would be totally haram. But I can tell you it makes no sense. He's talking about, death, that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. He's just seen a ghost. Like yesterday, he saw his father's ghost. What do you mean no traveler returns? And so I think it makes sense to read this speech as a performance. Hamlet is showing off because Claudius and Polonius are standing behind a curtain watching him. And he knows it. He has maybe seen them climbing behind the curtain, climbing behind the column, hiding, watching him. Maybe he sees their shoes sticking out. But the versions of this that I find convincing, like Kenneth Branagh's film version, which is long and hard to watch.
Yes.
But the versions of the play that I like have Hamlet be aware that he's being watched. And so his whole to be or not to be, I'm thinking of killing myself, is kind of a performance for the spies who he knows have their eye on him at that moment. Okay. What else should I take? There's a question about Freud. Is it possible that Hamlet also loved his mother and so he recognized himself in Claudius? Again, I think it's a perfectly plausible reading, but it is depoliticized. It takes the state drama and turns it into the family drama. That's okay. It's interesting. That was definitely what inspired Laurence Olivier's film, was this Freud reading. Why did Shakespeare? Okay, so lots of questions from someone here, and someone else also asked, why Hamlet? Why did Shakespeare write Hamlet? Shakespeare wrote a lot of things. There were some features of Hamlet that were useful to him. He wanted to set it in Denmark because Denmark has an elective monarchy. So the drama of the play wouldn't make sense in another setting. In some ways, he wrote it right after Julius Caesar. And in some ways, Hamlet and Brutus have something in common about justice and injustice and what happens when you kill a dictator. Does it automatically mean that a just state or just government is going to follow? He was very interested in this problem. And as I said, I think he also wrote Hamlet at least twice. The one version, the first quarto version, that is a more active Hamlet, and then the second quarto that has a more reflective, thoughtful, and it's also much longer, more rhetorical Hamlet. As to why Hamlet, somebody asked why Hamlet has been selected out of all others to be the play that Arab writers adapt. Partly because it's very famous. Partly because it is about a problem of dictatorship. And it's a problem of dictatorship you can talk about. You know, if you stage Macbeth or if you stage Richard III, you may have some problems with the censorship. But if you stage Hamlet, a masterpiece of world literature, what's the problem? So you can do it. And the more famous it is, the more famous it becomes. Lots and lots of questions here, mostly about Shakespeare. So I guess what I want you to understand is that I have opinions about these questions, about the question of, oh, is Hamlet really mad? Or does Gertrude represent all women? Or why does Ophelia have no mother? But what I want to say is that there are, as with any text that is important, there are traditions of interpretation that affect how you will answer each of these questions. Everything you read points you a certain way, or you grow up thinking a certain way, or you see an adaptation that is a certain way. Do I have 2 more minutes? I want to show you, I want to show you a tiny clip from a brand new film that was just made. It's an Iraqi film. And let me see if I can find it for you. One second. Sorry, one second. I want to find it for you, and I want to Here we go, activate the sound sharing correctly if I can. Just to say that the question about how to interpret Hamlet is still alive. It's still a vigorous question. So this is a film about Hamlet, about a production of Hamlet that a director is staging. Can you see? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's clear.
So just 2 minutes.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم. شو الامور؟
الحمد لله.
بلشتوا بالاختبار؟
ايه هسه كم هاملت بقى عندنا؟
واحد. هاشم عبد الحسن مو؟
وهذا الداعي يعتقد هاملت قاعد بالشوارع بالقهوة وبالبيوت. يريد هنا هم نص بتاريخ الدراما. يريد يربس البطل شراوية بغدادية. يلا خليه يصعد.
يلا خليه نشوفه شلون. هاشم عبد الحسن يلا حبيبي.
السلام عليكم.
السلام.
بل عليكم أن تصلحوه إصلاحا تاما، ونبه الذين يمثلون أدوار المهرجين أن لا يقولوا إلا ما دون لهم للقول. دع الملكة المنتفخة يغريك ثانية بالفراش، ويقرص خدك ماجنا ويدعوك عصفورته. مصيري يصيح بي ويجعل كل عرق صغير في هذا الجسد صلبا عاتيا كعروق الأسد.
هاملت ليست مجرد شخصية صنعت ببراعة في عصر النهضة، إنها المسرحية الأولى التي تقدم لنا الشخصية هي السائدة وليس الحدث.
So if you're interested, I can share the whole film with you if I get permission from the filmmaker who is actually in Baghdad. But just to make the point that any interpretation that you advance, however skeptical your audience is of it, if you can make it convincing, it becomes true, it becomes plausible, it becomes a real reading of Shakespeare. And there is no, just as with any important text, there is no single reading that is correct. Any of these questions that you've asked me about the play can be answered a million different ways. If the answer is convincing, if it brings in many details from the play, if it explains many features of the play and the characters and the dialogue, then it becomes a real interpretation. And based on that interpretation, you can build an adaptation. You can put Hamlet or anybody else in whatever costume and setting that you want.
Yes, Margaret, I think you are tired.
Yeah.
There are so many questions because Hamlet stimulates so many questions. I always believe that Shakespeare is Eastern more than Western. So when I teach my students about Hamlet, the whole lecture is only questions. So this is. I think we will stop here because I know you are tired after the surgery. Thank you very much, and we look forward for more cooperation between us. It is really enjoyable and very stimulating lecture. Thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to write my email one more time in the chat here. I also pasted the link, Manish, the director, will forgive me, to this preview copy of Hamlet at Baghdad that I would be happy to share with you and to hear your thoughts about. If anybody wants to send me an email in Arabic or in English, ahlan wa sahlan, I would love to be in touch. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Fun to meet you and your students.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right. Yalla, take care.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.